The moving truck pulled away from my driveway, taking with it the last remnants of my old life. While inside my house, David was helping his new girlfriend arrange her meditation crystals on what used to be my kitchen windowsill. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. What neither of them knew was that every mortgage payment she thought she was splitting with him was actually going straight into my bank account, because I had never taken my name off the deed. The discovery that would shatter my world began on an ordinary Thursday morning in October. I had returned home early from a client consultation in downtown Austin, my arms full of fabric samples and paint swatches for the Henderson renovation project. The Tudor-style house in Westlake Hills had been our sanctuary for 7 years, purchased when David's marketing salary and my interior design business had finally aligned to make home ownership possible. Walking through the front door that morning, I expected to find the usual silence of our empty home, since David typically worked late on Thursdays preparing for his Friday presentations. Instead, I heard laughter drifting from the kitchen, followed by a woman's voice I didn't recognize saying something about chakra alignment and positive energy flow. My first thought was confusion rather than suspicion. David had mentioned nothing about having anyone over, and we rarely entertained during weekdays. Setting my materials down quietly in the foyer, I moved toward the kitchen, my footsteps muffled by the Persian runner we had carefully selected together 3 years earlier. Through the archway, I saw David leaning against our granite countertop, his shirt sleeves rolled up in that casual way I had always found attractive, listening intently to a woman I had never seen before. She was petite, with long dark hair flowing over her shoulders, wearing the kind of athleisure outfit that suggested she had either just finished or was about to begin some form of exercise. Her hands moved expressively as she spoke, gesturing toward different areas of our kitchen, while David nodded with obvious fascination. The woman was explaining something about feng shui and energy blockages in the home, her voice carrying the slight accent and measured cadence of someone accustomed to teaching yoga classes or leading meditation sessions. She moved through our space with an intimacy that made my stomach clench, opening cabinet doors to examine the arrangement of dishes, running her fingers along the edges of surfaces, commenting on how the morning light hit the breakfast nook where David and I shared coffee every weekend. David's attention was focused entirely on her, his expression displaying a kind of engagement I hadn't seen directed toward me in months. When she suggested rearranging our spice rack to promote better digestive health, he actually took notes on his phone. When she recommended replacing our coffee maker with a tea ceremony setup, he asked where they could shop for the necessary supplies together. The casual use of they and together hit me like cold water, suggesting a relationship that extended far beyond this single consultation. I remained frozen in the doorway, simultaneously wanting to announce my presence and desperate to understand what I was witnessing. The woman who introduced herself as Vanessa during their conversation seemed to be conducting some sort of spiritual assessment of our home, but the way David watched her every movement suggested this was far from a professional consultation. When she placed her hand on his arm while explaining the importance of removing negative energy from the master bedroom, the gesture carried an intimacy that made my chest tighten with recognition. David had been distant for months, a change I had attributed to stress at his marketing firm and the general challenges of maintaining a long-term relationship. Our conversations had become increasingly surface level, focused on logistics and schedules rather than dreams and feelings. Physical intimacy had dwindled to perfunctory encounters that left both of us feeling more alone than before. I had suggested couples counseling twice, only to have David dismiss the idea as unnecessary drama. Now, watching him hang on every word of this stranger's assessment of our shared space, I understood that his detachment from me had been accompanied by attachment to someone else. The realization didn't arrive as a sudden shock, but rather as a slow, sinking understanding that filled my chest with lead. This wasn't the first time they had been in our home together. The way Vanessa moved through the kitchen, opening drawers, and examining contents suggested familiarity with our space that could only come from repeated visits. When Vanessa suggested they move to the living room to assess the energy flow throughout the main floor, I quickly retreated to the front hallway, my heart pounding as I tried to process what I had witnessed. I could hear them moving through our home, their voices growing closer and then fading as they examined different rooms. Vanessa's commentary continued, covering everything from the placement of furniture to the colors of our walls. But David's responses had taken on a tone I recognized from the early days of our relationship, when he used to listen to my design ideas with similar fascination. The sound of footsteps on the staircase leading to our second floor sent me into action. I couldn't be discovered eavesdropping in my own home, nor could I bear to hear Vanessa's assessment of our bedroom, the space where David and I had once shared our most intimate moments. Grabbing my car keys from the entry table, I slipped out the front door and drove to the nearby Starbucks, my hands shaking as I tried to appear normal while ordering a latte I didn't want. Sitting in my car in the parking lot, I attempted to construct innocent explanations for what I had witnessed. Perhaps Vanessa was a professional organizer or feng shui consultant David had hired as a surprise for me. Maybe she was connected to his work somehow, brought in to assess our home for a marketing campaign about lifestyle optimization. But none of these explanations could account for the intimacy I had observed, the way David had looked at her, or the casual familiarity with which she had moved through our private space. My phone buzzed with a text from David asking where I was, mentioning that he had expected me home by now. I responded that I had stopped for coffee after my client meeting, buying myself time to figure out how to handle this discovery. Another text arrived minutes later, saying he would be working late and not to wait up for dinner. The casual lie, delivered so smoothly after what I had just witnessed, confirmed that this was not an isolated incident, but part of an ongoing deception. Driving home an hour later, I found our house empty, with no evidence of Vanessa's visit, except for a faint scent of patchouli in the kitchen and a slight rearrangement of items on the windowsill. David's laptop bag was gone from his office, supporting his claim of working late, but I noticed that our bedroom had been tidied in a way that suggested someone had been there who cared more about appearances than we typically did on weekday afternoons. That evening, I sat alone at our dining room table, surrounded by the design elements we had chosen together over the years, trying to reconcile the man I had married with the stranger who could bring another woman into our home and lie about it so effortlessly. The betrayal felt layered, involving not just emotional infidelity, but the violation of our shared space and the casual dishonesty that had apparently become routine for David. Sleep eluded me that night as I lay beside David, who had returned home after midnight claiming a crisis at work had kept him busy. His explanations had become increasingly elaborate over the past few months, filled with details about client demands and project deadlines that somehow always required his attention. During evening hours, preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Now I understood that these stories were carefully constructed covers for time spent with Vanessa, and the realization made me feel foolish for having believed them so readily. The next few weeks brought a heightened awareness of David's patterns and behaviors. I began noticing details that had previously escaped my attention, like the way he guarded his phone and the frequency with which he volunteered to run errands that seemed to take much longer than necessary. Our conversations became stilted as I struggled to respond naturally to his questions and comments, knowing that so much of what he shared with me was fabricated. 3 weeks after the kitchen encounter, I decided to work from home on a day when David believed I would be meeting with clients across town. My plan was simple: to understand the scope of what was happening in my own home and to gather enough information to confront David with undeniable evidence. I positioned myself in the upstairs office with a clear view of our driveway, my laptop, open to provide cover if David returned unexpectedly. Vanessa arrived shortly after noon, this time carrying what appeared to be grocery bags and a small overnight case. She used her own key to enter through the front door, a detail that hit me with fresh waves of betrayal. David had given her access to our home without my knowledge or consent, making her a partner in the violation of our shared space. Through the window, I watched her move through our kitchen with the confidence of someone who belonged there, unpacking groceries and beginning what appeared to be meal preparation. David arrived home early, something he rarely did when he knew I would be there, further confirming that these visits were carefully planned around my schedule. From my vantage point upstairs, I could hear them talking and laughing, their voices carrying the easy intimacy of people who had spent considerable time together. The sounds of cooking and casual conversation drifted upward, creating a domestic scene that felt like a mockery of the life David and I had built in this house. When their conversation moved to the living room, I crept to the top of the stairs, positioning myself where I could hear but not be seen. Vanessa was talking about her yoga classes and her growing social media following, describing plans to expand her wellness brand through partnerships with local businesses. David listened with the kind of supportive engagement he had once shown toward my design career, asking thoughtful questions and offering suggestions with genuine enthusiasm. The conversation took a more serious turn when Vanessa mentioned her lease ending in 2 months and her uncertainty about finding a new place that would accommodate her home studio setup. David's response made my blood run cold. He suggested she consider moving in with him, explaining that they were spending so much time together anyway, and that the house had plenty of space for her wellness activities. The casual way he offered to share our home, as though I were merely an inconvenient obstacle rather than his wife and co-owner of the property, revealed the depth of his detachment from our marriage. Vanessa's response was practical rather than romantic, asking about logistics like rent splitting and storage space for her equipment. David assured her that money wouldn't be an issue, that he could handle the mortgage payments alone, and that she could contribute what she felt comfortable with toward utilities and groceries. The conversation continued with them discussing how to convert our guest bedroom into a dedicated yoga space and whether the backyard had enough privacy for outdoor meditation sessions. Listening to them plan a future in my home while I crouched on the stairs like an intruder in my own house, I felt something shift inside me. The hurt and betrayal were still present, but they were joined by a cold clarity about what needed to happen next. David had made his choice, and now I needed to make mine. The difference was that I held information he didn't possess, information that would prove crucial in the weeks to come. That evening, after Vanessa had left and David had resumed his normal routine of working late, I began researching divorce attorneys and property laws in Texas. What I discovered filled me with grim satisfaction. Since we had purchased the house, before marriage, and I had been the primary contributor to the down payment from my design business savings, my name was the primary one on the deed. David was listed as a co-owner, but the mortgage was in my name alone, a detail we had chosen for financial reasons that now seemed providential. More importantly, Texas property laws would require David to buy out my share of the house, or sell it entirely, with me entitled to at least half of the equity we had built together. The house had appreciated significantly since our purchase, meaning my share would provide a substantial foundation for starting over. The irony was perfect. David's plan to install his mistress in our home would ultimately fund my escape from both of them. I spent the following days consulting with attorneys and financial advisors, building a strategy that would protect my interests while extricating myself from a marriage that had become a daily exercise in humiliation. The legal consultations revealed additional advantages I hadn't considered. Since David had given Vanessa access to our home without my consent, and since she had been staying there regularly without being on the lease or deed, there were potential legal complications that would work in my favor during divorce proceedings. The most challenging aspect of this period was maintaining normal appearances while living with the knowledge of David's betrayal and his plans to replace me. Every conversation felt like a performance, every shared meal like a charade. When he asked about my day or commented on household matters, I had to resist the urge to reveal what I knew, saving my ammunition for the moment when it would have maximum impact. 2 weeks into my secret preparations, David announced that he had been thinking about our relationship and felt we needed to have a serious conversation about our future together. The irony of his timing was almost amusing. He had decided to initiate the breakup, just as I was finalizing plans to leave him. We agreed to talk over dinner that weekend, a conversation I knew would end our marriage, but not in the way David expected. The house that had once represented our shared dreams and future together now felt like a stage set for the final act of our relationship. Every room held memories of better times, but also evidence of recent violations that had transformed familiar spaces into scenes of betrayal. As I prepared for the conversation that would end everything, I took comfort in knowing that David's carefully laid plans were about to encounter an obstacle he had never anticipated: my refusal to be discarded quietly. The weekend that would change everything was approaching, and with it, the satisfaction of watching David discover that the woman he had underestimated would not be disappearing as conveniently as he had assumed. Vanessa might have thought she was moving into her new home, but she was actually stepping into a situation that would teach both of them that actions have consequences, and that the quiet wife they had dismissed had been planning her own moves, all along. The conversation that would officially end my marriage took place on a Saturday evening in November, with candles flickering on our dining room table and the scent of the roast chicken I had prepared filling the air. David had dressed carefully for the occasion, wearing the navy button-down shirt I had given him for his birthday, and his demeanor carried the nervous energy of someone about to deliver rehearsed lines. I sat across from him, my own performance, carefully crafted to appear unsuspecting and emotionally available for whatever bombshell he was about to drop. David began with compliments about the meal and comments about how nice it was to have uninterrupted time together, building up to his main point with the kind of careful preamble that confirmed he had practiced this speech. When he finally launched into his prepared remarks about feeling like we had grown apart and needing space to figure out what he really wanted from life, I maintained an expression of concerned attention while internally marveling at his ability to deliver such calculated cruelty with apparent sincerity. His explanation painted our marriage as a mutual drift rather than a deliberate betrayal, describing how we had both changed over the years and perhaps wanted different things from our future together. He spoke about feeling constrained by domestic responsibilities and yearning for more adventure and spontaneity in his life. The careful language was designed to make the breakup sound like a natural evolution, rather than his choice to replace me with someone he found more exciting. When David suggested we consider a trial separation, giving each other space to explore what we truly wanted, I asked the questions a blindsided wife would ask. Where would he stay during this separation? How long did he envision it lasting? What did this mean for our shared financial obligations? His answers revealed the extent of his planning while maintaining the fiction that this was a spontaneous decision driven by mutual incompatibility rather than his desire to be with Vanessa. David had already arranged to stay with his brother, Ryan, temporarily, he explained, just until he could find a more permanent living situation. He suggested I might want to visit my mother in San Antonio or take a trip somewhere to gain perspective on our relationship. The transparent attempt to get me out of the house while he moved Vanessa in would have been insulting if it weren't so perfectly suited to my own plans. My response was carefully calibrated to appear hurt but cooperative, the reaction of a woman who loved her husband enough to give him the space he claimed he needed. I agreed to the trial separation while asking for time to process what this meant for our future together. David's relief was palpable as he realized I wasn't going to fight. His decision or demand immediate answers about his intentions. Over the following week, we maintained the polite distance of people coordinating the logistics of a breakup while living in the same space. David spent most evenings out, claiming he was meeting with Ryan or working late, while I continued my preparations with the attorneys and financial advisors who were helping me secure my interests. The conversations about dividing household items and managing shared expenses felt surreal, as though we were actors in a play about the end of a marriage rather than people whose lives were actually falling apart. David moved out on a Thursday morning, loading his clothes and personal items into his sedan while I was supposedly at a client meeting. I had actually parked a few blocks away and watched from a distance as he made multiple trips between the house and his car, his movements quick and efficient like someone eager to complete an unpleasant task. When he drove away, I felt a mixture of relief and anticipation, knowing that the next phase of his plan would soon begin. 3 days later, Vanessa's moving truck arrived. I watched from Nicole's apartment across town as she sent me photos of the activity outside my house, having stationed herself in a coffee shop with a clear view of my street. The images showed Vanessa directing movers who carried yoga equipment, meditation cushions, and boxes of what appeared to be wellness products into my home. She moved with the confidence of someone who believed she was starting a new chapter, in a space that now belonged to her. The most galling photo showed Vanessa standing in my front doorway, arms spread wide in a gesture of claiming or blessing the space, her face tilted toward the sun with an expression of grateful satisfaction. She was wearing flowing white pants and a crop top that emphasized her yoga-toned physique, looking like she was posing for her social media followers to document this exciting life transition. The image crystallized everything I found infuriating about her presence in my life, the casual appropriation of what I had worked years to build. Over the next 2 weeks, Nicole's surveillance revealed the domestic routine that David and Vanessa had established in my house. They had converted the guest bedroom into a yoga studio, complete with mirrors and specialized lighting. The backyard had been transformed into an outdoor meditation space with wind chimes and decorative stones arranged in patterns that probably had spiritual significance. Most painfully, they had rearranged the master bedroom, removing photos of David and me and replacing them with candles and crystals that reflected Vanessa's aesthetic preferences. The violation of seeing another woman's belongings arranged throughout my home was almost physical in its intensity. Through Nicole's photos, I could see Vanessa's tea collection taking over my kitchen cabinets, her meditation books filling the shelves where my design magazines used to live, and her exercise equipment occupying the living room space where David and I used to watch movies together. Every change felt like an erasure of my existence and my contributions to creating our shared home. What made the situation even more infuriating was David's apparent belief that he was handling the separation with sensitivity and consideration. He sent me text messages asking how I was adjusting and whether I needed anything from the house, maintaining the fiction that this was a mutual decision that we were navigating together. His concern felt patronizing rather than genuine, especially knowing that he was playing house with Vanessa while pretending to be thoughtfully single. The legal proceedings moved forward with devastating efficiency. My attorney had filed for divorce on grounds of adultery, supported by evidence that David had allowed another woman to move into our marital home during our separation. Texas law was clear about protecting the interests of the wronged spouse, particularly when the other party had engaged in behavior that violated the terms of marriage. The documentation of Vanessa's presence in the house, combined with David's lies about his living situation, created a strong case for me to retain primary ownership of our shared assets. More importantly, the mortgage payments continued to come directly from David's bank account into mine, just as they had throughout our marriage. David had set up automatic payments years ago and apparently hadn't considered that I might not immediately remove my name from the deed or redirect the payment structure. Every month he was essentially paying me to live in my house with his mistress, a situation that would continue until the divorce was finalized and property ownership was legally resolved. The financial arrangement was even more advantageous than I had initially realized. Since David was eager to maintain the fiction that he was independently managing his living situation, he hadn't questioned the mortgage payments or asked for any changes to our shared financial obligations. His desire to appear self-sufficient was costing him nearly $3,000 monthly while providing me with the resources I needed to establish my new life. I used this breathing room to explore opportunities in Denver, a city I had always loved for its combination of urban sophistication and outdoor recreation. The design market there was thriving, with new construction and renovation projects creating demand for someone with my skills and experience. More intriguingly, I had been contacted by James Rodriguez, a real estate developer who had seen my work in Austin and was interested in discussing a partnership opportunity. James specialized in luxury property staging and high-end renovations, transforming outdated homes into showcase properties that commanded premium prices. His business model involved purchasing undervalued properties, hiring designers to create stunning interiors, and then selling them to wealthy buyers who wanted move-in ready luxury. He was looking for a creative partner who could handle the design aspects while he managed the real estate and financial components of each project. Our initial phone conversations revealed a business opportunity that excited me more than anything I had pursued in years. James was proposing a partnership where I would have creative control over all design decisions while sharing in the profits from each successfully completed project. The arrangement would allow me to use my skills in a more entrepreneurial way, while building equity in multiple properties rather than just collecting fees for my services. The timing seemed almost magical. Just as my marriage was dissolving and my living situation was becoming untenable, an opportunity had emerged that would allow me to start over in a new city with a business partnership that could provide both financial security and creative fulfillment. The contrast between David's deception and James's straightforward business proposition was striking, offering me hope that not all partnerships were doomed to betrayal and disappointment. I flew to Denver for a long weekend to meet James in person and tour some of the properties he was considering for our potential collaboration. The city welcomed me with crisp mountain air and stunning views of the Rocky Mountains, a dramatic change from the humid flatness of Austin. James met me at the airport, and I was immediately struck by his professionalism and genuine enthusiasm for the business we might build together. Our first property tour took us through a 1960s ranch house in the trendy Rhino district that had good bones but desperately needed updating. James explained his vision for transforming the space into a modern showcase while preserving its mid-century character, and I found myself sketching ideas and suggesting improvements with an excitement I hadn't felt about work in months. The creative collaboration felt natural and energizing, a reminder of how much I had missed working with someone who valued my input and expertise. Over dinner that evening, James and I discussed the logistics of our potential partnership. He was offering me a 50% stake in each project we completed together, along with a base salary that would cover my living expenses while we established the business. The arrangement would require me to relocate to Denver within 6 months, but he was confident that we could build a portfolio of successful projects that would establish us as premier providers of luxury property transformation services. The business model was sound and the market opportunity was real, but what impressed me most about James was his straightforward communication and genuine respect for what I brought to the partnership. He asked thoughtful questions about my design, philosophy, and listened carefully to my ideas about how we might differentiate ourselves from other luxury staging companies. The conversation felt like a true collaboration between equals rather than a job interview or sales pitch. Flying back to Austin, I felt energized by the possibility of this new direction, while simultaneously dreading the return to the complicated situation I had left behind. David had sent several text messages asking about my trip and whether I was doing okay, maintaining his performance as the caring, estranged husband while living with his mistress in my house. The disconnect between his apparent concern and his actual behavior was becoming increasingly difficult to tolerate. Nicole picked me up from the airport and filled me in on the latest developments in David and Vanessa's domestic arrangement. They had apparently hosted a dinner party over the weekend, inviting several of Vanessa's yoga friends to celebrate her new living situation. The image of strangers eating dinner at my table and drinking wine from my glasses while celebrating the end of my marriage was almost too painful to contemplate. More disturbing was Nicole's report that Vanessa had been posting photos on social media that featured recognizable elements of my home's interior, though she had been careful not to include images that would clearly identify the location. The posts showed her morning yoga routine in what was obviously my living room, her healthy breakfast preparations in my kitchen, and her evening meditation sessions in my backyard. She was essentially using my home as a backdrop for her wellness brand while building an online following that she would monetize through sponsorships and product sales. The calculated nature of Vanessa's social media strategy revealed a level of premeditation that went beyond simply having an affair with my husband. She had clearly seen our home as an upgrade to her living situation and a valuable asset for her business aspirations. The beautiful spaces I had carefully designed were now serving as free advertising for her wellness brand, allowing her to present herself as someone whose lifestyle was worthy of emulation and purchase. This realization hardened my resolve to move forward with the Denver opportunity while ensuring that David and Vanessa would face consequences for their betrayal. I called James that evening and accepted his partnership offer, agreeing to relocate to Denver within 60 days and begin our collaboration with the Rhino property we had toured together. The decision felt like stepping off a cliff, but also like finally taking control of my own destiny after months of being manipulated by people I had trusted. The next few weeks involved intensive preparation for my new life while maintaining the facade that I was simply taking time to process our separation. I arranged for a moving company to pack and store my personal belongings, telling David that I was putting things in storage while I figured out my next steps. I closed my Austin design business and referred my existing clients to other designers, explaining that I was taking a break to focus on my personal situation. Most importantly, I finalized the legal documentation that would give me maximum leverage when David and Vanessa discovered their living arrangement was not as secure as they believed. My attorney had prepared papers that would require David to either buy out my share of the house immediately or put it on the market within 30 days of being served. Given the current real estate market, my share of the equity would provide more than enough capital to establish myself in Denver while leaving David scrambling to find alternative housing for himself and his mistress. The plan was coming together, with a symmetry that felt almost too perfect to be real. David's betrayal had provided me with the motivation and legal standing to extract myself from our marriage with significant financial advantages. Vanessa's presence in my house was generating evidence of adultery that strengthened my position in divorce proceedings. Their combined arrogance had blinded them to the legal and financial realities of their situation, creating vulnerabilities that I was positioned to exploit. As my departure date approached, I felt a mixture of anticipation and nervous energy that reminded me of the excitement I had felt as a young woman starting my design career. The difference was that this new beginning was being funded by the consequences of other people's poor choices rather than my own naive optimism. David and Vanessa had taught me valuable lessons about trust and betrayal, lessons that would serve me well as I built a new life based on partnerships that were legally documented and mutually beneficial. The house that had once represented my dreams of domestic happiness would soon become the foundation for a much more interesting future. David's mortgage payments would continue flowing into my accounts for several more weeks, essentially funding my relocation and business startup costs. The irony was delicious. The home he was sharing with his mistress was actually paying for my escape to a better life, and neither of them had any idea what was coming. Moving to Denver felt like stepping into an alternate version of my life, where anything was possible. The city's energy matched my newfound determination, with its combination of urban sophistication and rugged mountain backdrop providing the perfect setting for reinvention. James had arranged for me to stay in a furnished corporate apartment in the Rhino district while I searched for permanent housing, and the temporary space's industrial aesthetic of exposed brick and steel beams felt like a dramatic departure from the traditional elegance I had cultivated in Austin. The first property James and I tackled together was the 1960s ranch house I had toured during my initial visit. The owners were motivated sellers dealing with an estate situation, which meant we could purchase the property significantly below market value despite its prime location. Walking through the empty rooms with James, measuring spaces and discussing renovation possibilities, I felt the creative excitement that had drawn me to interior design in the first place, but amplified by the knowledge that this project could generate substantial profit rather than just a design fee. Our collaboration exceeded my expectations from the very beginning. James handled the business negotiations and construction management with impressive efficiency, while I focused on creating a design vision that would appeal to Denver's affluent buyers. The ranch house had excellent bones with its open floor plan and floor-to-ceiling windows, but decades of neglect had left it feeling dark and dated. My plan involved brightening the interior with a neutral palette while adding dramatic elements like a statement fireplace and custom built-ins that would photograph beautifully for marketing purposes. The renovation process became a masterclass in high-end property transformation. James had relationships with contractors who specialized in luxury finishes, and watching them execute my designs with precision and attention to detail was incredibly satisfying. Every decision we made was strategic, from the Italian marble countertops that would appeal to sophisticated buyers to the smart home technology that demonstrated the property's modern functionality. Within 3 months, we had transformed a tired ranch house into a stunning contemporary showcase. The financial results were even more impressive than James had predicted. We sold the property for nearly double what we had invested in purchase and renovation costs, generating a profit that exceeded what I had earned in an entire year of traditional design work back in Austin. My share of the proceeds was enough to purchase my own home in Denver while providing capital for our next project. The success validated James's business model, while proving that I could thrive in this more entrepreneurial approach to design. My personal life began to stabilize as well. I found a charming bungalow in the Highlands neighborhood with mountain views and a garden space where I could experiment with landscape design. The house needed minor updates that I could handle myself, providing a creative outlet separate from our business projects. For the first time in months, I had a space that was entirely my own, free from the emotional weight of shared memories or the violation of unwelcome intruders. Denver's social scene offered opportunities to build new relationships based on my current interests rather than my past identity as David's wife. I joined a hiking group that explored different trails each weekend, met other small business owners at networking events, and even started taking pottery classes at a local studio. The activities filled my evenings and weekends with engaging people who knew me only as Katie, the successful interior designer and property developer, rather than the woman whose marriage had imploded due to infidelity. The distance from Austin provided perspective on how constrained my life had become during the final years of my marriage. David's subtle undermining of my confidence and Vanessa's invasion of my personal space had created a sense of powerlessness that I hadn't fully recognized until I escaped it. Living in Denver, surrounded by new challenges and opportunities, I rediscovered the ambition and self-assurance that had made me successful in the first place. James and I developed an easy working relationship that felt both professional and personally supportive. He respected my creative judgment while offering practical insights about market trends and buyer preferences. Our conversations over lunch or during site visits covered everything from design philosophy to business strategy, and I appreciated having a partner who valued my contributions without any hidden agenda or emotional manipulation. The success of our first project led to opportunities for more ambitious ventures. James had identified a Victorian mansion in Cherry Creek that had been divided into apartments but could be restored to its original grandeur for the luxury market. The project would require a larger investment and more complex renovation work, but the potential returns were proportionally greater. Walking through the mansion's neglected rooms, I could envision the dramatic transformation that would make it one of Denver's most desirable properties. Meanwhile, developments in Austin were unfolding exactly as my attorney had predicted. David had received the divorce papers and legal notices regarding property ownership, shattering his comfortable assumption that our separation was temporary and manageable. According to Nicole, who continued to monitor the situation from her strategic coffee shop, David's initial reaction had been disbelief, followed by panic, as he realized the financial implications of my legal position. The mortgage situation created immediate pressure for David and Vanessa. Since I remained the primary name on the deed, and the mortgage was in my name alone, David had no legal right to make decisions about the property without my consent. More importantly, he was now facing the choice between buying out my substantial equity share or agreeing to sell the house, either of which would require Vanessa to find alternative housing arrangements. Nicole reported that David had made several attempts to contact me directly, leaving voicemails that progressed from confused to angry to desperate as he began to understand his precarious position. His messages revealed his assumption that I would be reasonable about the house situation, apparently believing that our years of marriage had created some obligation for me to accommodate his current living arrangement. The entitlement in his tone was remarkable, suggesting he genuinely believed I should facilitate his relationship with the woman who had replaced me. Vanessa's social media presence became increasingly frantic as their housing situation grew uncertain. Her posts about gratitude and positive energy took on a defensive tone, as though she were trying to manifest stability through sheer force of will. The photos from my house continued, but they now carried captions about embracing change and trusting the universe to provide solutions, suggesting she was aware that their domestic arrangement faced challenges. The legal process moved forward, with relentless efficiency. Texas property law was clear about protecting the rights of the spouse whose name was on the deed, particularly when the other party had violated the marriage through adultery. My attorney had documented Vanessa's presence in the house through social media posts and witness statements, creating an indisputable record of David's infidelity that strengthened my position in all negotiations. David's attempts to retain legal representation revealed the weakness of his position. According to my attorney's contacts in Austin, several law firms had declined to represent him after reviewing the documentation of his situation. The combination of adultery evidence and the property ownership structure made it nearly impossible to argue for any arrangement that would allow him to keep the house or avoid buying out my equity share. The financial pressure was mounting for David in ways he hadn't anticipated. The mortgage payments alone were substantial, but he was also responsible for property taxes, insurance, and maintenance costs for a house he didn't legally own. Every month that passed without resolution was costing him thousands of dollars while I built my new life with resources that essentially came from his attempts to replace me. James noticed the positive change in my demeanor as these developments unfolded. My confidence in our business partnership grew stronger, and I began taking on more leadership responsibilities in our projects. The Victorian mansion restoration became my primary focus, and I threw myself into researching historical details and sourcing period-appropriate materials that would honor the building's original character while incorporating modern luxury amenities. The design process for the mansion was the most complex project I had ever undertaken. Each room required careful consideration of historical accuracy balanced with contemporary functionality. I spent weeks in architectural libraries and antique shops, learning about Victorian design principles and hunting for authentic fixtures that would support the restoration's credibility. The intellectual challenge was exactly what I needed to fully engage my creative abilities, while the physical demands of managing such a large project proved I could handle much more responsibility than I had ever been given in Austin. Working with craftsmen who specialized in historic restoration expanded my understanding of construction techniques and materials. I learned about plaster repair, wood refinishing, and stained glass restoration, skills that would make me more valuable in future projects while satisfying my desire to master new aspects of design work. The mansion became a laboratory for experimenting with approaches I had never had the opportunity to try before. The financial success of our first project had attracted attention from other investors interested in partnering with our company. James fielded inquiries from people who wanted to provide capital for larger projects in exchange for profit-sharing arrangements. The prospect of expanding our business beyond what we could fund ourselves was exciting, offering the possibility of taking on multiple projects simultaneously and building a more substantial company. Denver's real estate market was experiencing unprecedented growth, with buyers from California and other expensive markets driving demand for luxury properties. Our timing couldn't have been better for establishing a business focused on high-end renovations and staging. The combination of my design expertise and James's business acumen was proving to be exactly what the market needed, creating opportunities that were both financially rewarding and creatively satisfying. My personal finances reflected this professional success. The profit from our first project, combined with the ongoing mortgage payments from David, had eliminated any financial stress while providing capital for both personal and business investments. I was able to purchase quality furniture for my Denver home, invest in professional development courses, and build savings for future opportunities without worrying about monthly expenses. The contrast with my situation just 6 months earlier was remarkable. In Austin, I had been financially dependent on a marriage that was secretly dissolving while my career had stagnated in familiar patterns. In Denver, I was building equity in multiple properties while developing skills that would serve me for decades. The betrayal that had initially devastated me was now clearly visible as the catalyst for a much better life. Nicole visited Denver for a long weekend, and seeing my new life through her eyes helped me appreciate how dramatically everything had changed. She was amazed by my confidence and energy, commenting that I seemed like a completely different person from the heartbroken woman who had discovered her husband's affair. The transformation wasn't just external success, but internal strength and clarity about what I wanted from my future. During Nicole's visit, we received updates about the situation in Austin that confirmed my legal strategy was working perfectly. David had finally accepted that he couldn't maintain his current living situation without either purchasing my share of the house or agreeing to sell it. The financial reality was stark. Buying out my equity would require a substantial loan that he couldn't qualify for alone, while selling the house would force him and Vanessa to find alternative housing in a competitive rental market. Vanessa's reaction to their housing crisis revealed aspects of her character that David was apparently seeing for the first time. According to Nicole's sources, she had become increasingly demanding about finding a solution that would allow her to maintain the lifestyle she had established in my house. Her social media brand depended on projecting an image of successful living, and the prospect of downgrading to a rental apartment was threatening the credibility she had built with her followers. The stress was clearly affecting their relationship. David's romantic partner was proving to be much less supportive when faced with practical challenges than she had been when everything was going smoothly. The woman who had seemed so spiritual and positive when she was benefiting from my home, and my husband's attention was becoming bitter and demanding when those advantages disappeared. My attorney called with an update that brought particular satisfaction. David had finally made an offer to buy out my share of the house, but the amount was significantly lower than the appraised value, apparently reflecting his hope that I would accept less money in exchange for a quick resolution. The insulting nature of the offer revealed that he still fundamentally misunderstood both my legal position and my determination to receive full compensation for what I was owed. The rejection of David's lowball offer set the stage for the final phase of our property dispute. Since he couldn't afford to buy me out at fair market value, and I had no interest in accepting less than what I was legally entitled to, the house would have to be sold. This outcome was exactly what I had been working toward, providing maximum financial benefit while ensuring that David and Vanessa would have to disrupt their comfortable arrangement. James and I celebrated this development over dinner at one of Denver's best restaurants, toasting not just my legal victory, but the broader success we were building together. The Victorian Mansion project was ahead of schedule and already attracting interest from potential buyers, suggesting another profitable outcome was imminent. My new life was exceeding expectations in every measurable way, while my old life was finally reaching the resolution I had carefully orchestrated. The timing seemed perfect for the next phase of my plan. David and Vanessa would soon learn that their assumption about my passivity had been a costly mistake, while I would return to Austin with the resources and confidence to conclude this chapter of my life on my own terms. The woman who had been betrayed and dismissed was about to demonstrate exactly how much she had learned from the experience. The phone call from my attorney arrived on a crisp December morning while I was reviewing paint samples for the Victorian Mansion's dining room. David had finally agreed to put the house on the market, accepting that he couldn't afford to buy out my equity share and had run out of legal maneuvers to delay the inevitable. The news filled me with a mixture of satisfaction and anticipation, knowing that the final act of this drama was about to begin and that I would be returning to Austin with considerably more power than when I had left. The real estate agent we selected was someone I had worked with professionally during my Austin years, a woman named Patricia Chen who specialized in luxury properties in Westlake Hills. Patricia understood the unique situation surrounding the buy-sale and agreed to coordinate showings and negotiations in a way that would maximize our return while minimizing drama. Her first assessment of the property confirmed what I had suspected. The improvements Vanessa had made for her wellness brand had actually increased the home's appeal to certain buyers, particularly those interested in dedicated yoga or meditation spaces. James encouraged me to take an active role in preparing the house for sale, recognizing that my intimate knowledge of the property's features and potential would be valuable in positioning it effectively. The irony wasn't lost on either of us, that I would be using my professional expertise to help sell the home where my marriage had ended, turning my personal betrayal into a profitable business transaction. The prospect of returning to Austin as a successful property developer rather than an abandoned wife felt like the perfect culmination of everything I had built in Denver. Our Victorian Mansion project reached completion just as the Austin house. Preparations were beginning, creating perfect timing for me to focus on both opportunities simultaneously. The mansion sold within a week of being listed, attracting multiple offers that drove the final price well above our asking amount. My share of the profits was substantial enough to consider purchasing investment properties in both Denver and Austin, expanding my business operations across both markets. The success of our partnership had attracted attention from real estate investors throughout Colorado, leading to opportunities for larger and more complex projects. James and I were fielding inquiries about historic commercial buildings, luxury condominiums, and even resort properties in mountain towns. The business we had started with a single ranch house renovation was evolving into a comprehensive property development company with the potential for significant expansion. My confidence in returning to Austin was bolstered by these professional achievements and the financial security they provided. I was no longer the struggling designer who had discovered her husband's betrayal, but a successful entrepreneur with multiple income streams and a growing reputation in luxury property development. The transformation felt complete, and I was eager to demonstrate it to everyone who had witnessed my departure under such difficult circumstances. Patricia began scheduling showings for the Austin house, and each report she provided gave me insight into David and Vanessa's current living situation. The house was being maintained reasonably well, though some of the modifications Vanessa had made were polarizing for potential buyers. The converted guest bedroom yoga studio appealed to wellness-focused buyers but seemed excessive to more traditional purchasers. The backyard meditation space was similarly divisive, either charming or bizarre, depending on the viewer's perspective. More interesting were Patricia's observations about the occupants during showings. David appeared stressed and eager to complete the sale as quickly as possible, while Vanessa seemed resentful about having to accommodate strangers touring what she clearly considered her home. The tension between them was apparent to Patricia, who had enough experience with divorcing couples to recognize the signs of a relationship under pressure. The first serious offer came from a young tech executive who was relocating to Austin from California and appreciated both the house's traditional architecture and Vanessa's wellness-focused modifications. The bid was slightly below our asking price, but reasonable enough to consider, especially given David's obvious desperation to close the sale quickly. However, I decided to counter at full asking price, knowing that the Austin market could support it and wanting to maximize my return on this final transaction. David's reaction to my counteroffer revealed how completely his position had deteriorated. According to Patricia, he became agitated during their phone conversation, arguing that we should accept the first reasonable offer rather than risk losing the sale by being greedy. His desperation was understandable given that every month the sale was delayed, cost him mortgage payments he couldn't afford. But his characterization of my business decision as greed showed he still didn't grasp the reality of his situation. The buyer accepted our counteroffer after minimal negotiation, confirming that the house was appropriately priced and that David's anxiety about losing the sale had been unnecessary. The closing was scheduled for mid-January, giving me time to coordinate my return to Austin with the completion of other business obligations in Denver. James offered to handle our current projects while I was away, understanding that this trip represented important personal closure as well as a business opportunity. Vanessa's social media activity during this period provided fascinating insight into her emotional state. Her posts about gratitude and positive thinking took on an increasingly frantic quality, as though she were trying to manifest a solution to their housing crisis through sheer force of optimism. She began sharing content about embracing change and trusting the universe during difficult transitions, clearly attempting to frame their forced move as a spiritual growth opportunity rather than a practical failure. More telling were the subtle signs of discord between David and Vanessa that emerged in her online presence. Previous posts had frequently featured David in romantic or domestic contexts, portraying their relationship as a perfect partnership between compatible souls. Recent content focused almost exclusively on her individual journey and personal development, with David's presence notably absent from both photos and captions. Nicole provided additional intelligence about their deteriorating relationship through her network of mutual acquaintances. David's stress about the house sale was affecting his work performance, leading to tensions with his supervisors that threatened his job security. Vanessa's demands for financial support in finding new housing were creating arguments about money and responsibility that revealed fundamental incompatibilities they had previously ignored. The yoga instructor who had seemed so spiritually enlightened while enjoying the benefits of my home was proving to be much less understanding when faced with the consequences of her choices. Her expectation that David would solve their housing problem without any sacrifice on her part suggested a level of entitlement that was finally becoming apparent to him. The woman he had chosen over me was showing her true character, now that their situation required genuine partnership rather than just romantic passion. My attorney provided updates on David's increasingly desperate attempts to find alternative solutions. He had approached several lenders about refinancing options that would allow him to buy out my share of the house, but his debt-to-income ratio made him ineligible for the substantial loan required. He had also explored the possibility of bringing in a co-signer or partner investor, but none of his family members or friends were willing to take on such a significant financial commitment. The final weeks before closing were marked by David's last-ditch efforts to negotiate some arrangement that would allow him to keep the house. He offered to buy out my share over time through a payment plan, apparently not understanding that I had no interest in remaining financially connected to him for years to come. He suggested I might consider taking a smaller share of the proceeds in exchange for his agreement to finalize the divorce quickly, revealing his fundamental misunderstanding of both my legal position and my priorities. Each rejected proposal seemed to drive David closer to panic. Patricia reported that he called her office multiple times seeking reassurance that the sale would definitely close on schedule, as though he feared some last-minute complication might derail the transaction. His behavior suggested someone who had finally grasped the magnitude of his miscalculation, but still hoped to find some escape from the consequences. Meanwhile, my preparations for returning to Austin were proceeding smoothly. James and I had identified several potential investment properties in the area that could serve as the foundation for expanding our business into the Texas market. The financial windfall from the house sale would provide ample capital for purchasing and renovating properties that could generate both immediate profits and long-term rental income. I had also been researching Austin's luxury staging and design, Market. Identifying opportunities for offering services similar to what we provided in Denver. The city's rapid growth and influx of wealthy residents created demand for high-end property transformation that played to my strengthened skill set. Returning to Austin as a successful entrepreneur, rather than a displaced wife, would allow me to rebuild my professional network from a position of strength. The contrast between my current situation and my state of mind when I had left Austin was remarkable. 6 months ago, I had been financially dependent on a failing marriage and professionally stagnant in familiar routines. Now I was returning with substantial capital, proven business experience, and the confidence that comes from overcoming betrayal through strategic action rather than emotional reaction. Nicole helped coordinate my return visit, arranging for me to stay in her guest room and organizing social events that would allow me to reconnect with friends and professional contacts. The prospect of seeing people who had known me during the collapse of my marriage, but who would now encounter me as a successful property developer, was both exciting and nerve-wracking. I wanted to handle these interactions with grace, while making it clear that I had not merely survived David's betrayal, but had transformed it into an opportunity. The closing itself was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at Patricia's office, with all parties present to sign the final documents and transfer ownership. David would be there with his attorney, while I would attend with my legal representation, and the satisfaction of knowing that this transaction would conclude the most painful chapter of my life while funding the most promising one. Patricia warned me that emotions might run high during the closing, as David would be signing away his claim to the home where he had expected to build a future with Vanessa. The finality of the transaction would make their housing crisis immediate and unavoidable, forcing them to confront the full consequences of choices they had made months earlier, when everything seemed simple and consequence-free. I spent my final days in Denver wrapping up current projects and preparing detailed handover documents for James. Our business partnership had proven so successful that we were already discussing plans for me to return regularly to manage Colorado projects while establishing our Texas operations. The flexibility of our arrangement meant that my return to Austin didn't represent an ending, but rather an expansion of opportunities. The Victorian mansion had exceeded all our expectations in terms of both profit margin and professional recognition. Photos of the completed renovation had been featured in several design magazines, establishing our company's reputation for transforming challenging properties into showcase homes. The publicity had generated inquiries from potential clients in multiple states, suggesting that our business model could be replicated in various markets. James organized a farewell dinner at our favorite restaurant, inviting the contractors and craftsmen who had worked on our projects to celebrate what we had accomplished together. The evening felt like a graduation ceremony, marking my transition from a woman fleeing a personal crisis to a professional who had built something meaningful from the ruins of her previous life. The toasts and well-wishes from people who had witnessed my transformation were deeply gratifying. Flying back to Austin, I reflected on how completely my life had changed since that devastating discovery in my kitchen. The woman who had overheard her mother-in-law's manipulation and her husband's betrayal had evolved into someone who could turn personal tragedy into professional triumph. The house that had once represented my dreams of domestic happiness was about to become the foundation for a much more interesting future. The plane's descent into Austin revealed the familiar landscape of my former home, but I was seeing it, now through different eyes. This wasn't a return to defeat or a retreat from the life I had built in Denver, but rather a strategic expansion into a market where I had unique advantages and unfinished business. David and Vanessa were about to discover that the quiet wife they had dismissed had learned to play a much more sophisticated game than they had ever imagined. The closing was scheduled for the next morning, and after that, David would finally understand that his comfortable assumptions about my passivity had been the most expensive mistake of his life. The mortgage payments he had been making for months were about to be revealed as involuntary contributions to my new business venture, while the home he had shared with his mistress would become the launching pad for my expansion into Austin's luxury property market. Everything was in place for the final confrontation, and I was ready to demonstrate exactly how much I had learned about power, money, and strategic thinking during my months away. The betrayed wife was gone, replaced by a successful entrepreneur who understood that the best revenge was not emotional satisfaction, but financial success built on the foundation of other people's poor decisions. The morning of the closing arrived with the kind of bright winter sunshine that Austin rarely sees in January, as though the universe were providing perfect lighting for the final scene of this long drama. I dressed carefully for the occasion, choosing a tailored navy blazer and cream silk blouse that projected confidence without being ostentatious. My appearance needed to convey success and composure, the visual representation of how completely I had transformed since leaving this city in heartbreak. Patricia's office was located in a sleek downtown high-rise with panoramic views of the Austin skyline, a setting that emphasized the business nature of what we were completing. I arrived 15 minutes early, partly from habit and partly because I wanted to observe David's entrance and gauge his emotional state. The receptionist offered coffee while I reviewed the closing documents one final time, though my attorney had already confirmed that everything was in order for the transaction. David arrived precisely on time, accompanied by his attorney, and looking like a man who hadn't been sleeping well. His face was drawn with stress, and his usually meticulous grooming showed signs of neglect that suggested his personal crisis was affecting every aspect of his life. He nodded stiffly in my direction but avoided direct eye contact, apparently unable to reconcile his memories of our marriage with the reality of facing me across a conference table as an adversary. The transformation in his appearance was striking. The confident marketing executive who had once charmed clients and commanded meetings had been replaced by someone who looked defeated before the proceedings even began. His shoulders were hunched with tension, and his hands trembled slightly as he reviewed documents, physical manifestations of the pressure he had been under since learning that his comfortable living arrangement would be ending. Patricia began the closing by reviewing the terms of the sale and confirming that all parties understood their obligations. The buyer's representative was present via video conference, having completed their portion of the paperwork remotely, which meant the focus was entirely on David and me as we prepared to sever our final financial connection. The formal language of real estate transactions provided a buffer of professionalism that kept the emotional undercurrents from overwhelming the practical business at hand. When Patricia announced the final sale price and began calculating the distribution of proceeds, David's face went through a series of expressions that revealed his dawning comprehension of what the numbers meant. After paying off the remaining mortgage balance, realtor fees, and various closing costs, the net proceeds were substantial enough to provide me with significant capital while leaving David with enough to cover moving expenses, but not much more. His attorney whispered something in his ear that made David's eyes widen with what appeared to be surprise or alarm. The quiet consultation suggested that even his legal representation hadn't fully explained the financial implications of the sale until this moment. David had apparently been so focused on the mechanics of completing the transaction that he hadn't calculated exactly how much money he would walk away with versus how much I would receive. The moment Patricia announced that the mortgage had been in my name alone throughout our marriage and that David's monthly payments had been going directly into my account, the color drained from his face completely. The revelation that he had been paying me to live in my house with his mistress for the past 8 months struck him like a physical blow. His attorney looked equally shocked by this information, apparently having assumed that standard joint ownership applied to our situation. Vanessa's absence from the closing suddenly made sense to David in a way that was clearly painful for him to process. She had claimed a yoga teacher training conflict that prevented her from attending, but her real reason for avoiding the meeting was now obvious. She had known about the mortgage arrangement all along, having researched the property records when she first moved in and had deliberately hidden this information from David to avoid complications in their relationship. The quiet conference room erupted into tension as David realized the full scope of how thoroughly he had been manipulated by both his ex-wife and his current girlfriend. His attorney requested a brief recess to discuss the implications privately, but there was nothing to negotiate or change. The mortgage arrangement was completely legal, and David's payments had been made voluntarily without any coercion or misrepresentation on my part. When the meeting resumed, David's demeanor had shifted from stressed resignation to something approaching anger. He asked pointed questions about when I had known about the mortgage situation and whether I had deliberately concealed information from him. My attorney calmly explained that property ownership records were public information and that David's assumption about joint ownership had been his mistake, not my deception. The irony of David accusing me of deception while sitting in a conference room to sell the house where he had been living with his mistress wasn't lost on anyone present. Patricia maintained professional neutrality, but I could see her struggling, not to react to the obvious hypocrisy of his complaints. The man who had betrayed his marriage and lied about his living situation was outraged to discover that his wife had been more strategically minded than he had realized. As the paperwork was finalized and documents were signed, David's questions became increasingly desperate. He wanted to know where Vanessa would live, how long they had to vacate the property, and whether there were any arrangements that could extend their occupancy. Each inquiry revealed how completely unprepared he was for the practical consequences of their situation, having apparently assumed that solutions would somehow emerge without his active planning. Patricia's answers were straightforward and unforgiving. The new owners would take possession in 30 days, and any occupants would need to be gone by that date. There were no extensions or special arrangements available, and any personal property left behind would become the responsibility of the new owners to dispose of as they saw fit. The timeline gave David and Vanessa exactly 4 weeks to find alternative housing and complete their move. The final signatures were completed in relative silence, with David's pen strokes becoming increasingly forceful, as though he were trying to express his frustration through the physical act of signing documents. When Patricia announced that the EE transaction was complete and funds would be transferred within 2 business days, David gathered his papers with sharp, angry movements that contrasted with the careful composure he had maintained throughout most of our marriage. As David prepared to leave, he finally made direct eye contact with me for the first time during the entire proceeding. His expression was a mixture of hurt, anger, and something that might have been grudging respect for how thoroughly I had outmaneuvered him. The conversation he had expected to have about fair division of assets and amicable separation had never materialized because I had been operating from a position of strength he hadn't even known existed. Standing in the parking garage after the closing, David made one final attempt to engage me in discussion about our situation. He approached with the kind of hesitant determination that suggested he had rehearsed what he wanted to say, but wasn't sure how I would respond. His opening comment about hoping we could handle our divorce as mature adults revealed that he still didn't fully grasp the power dynamics of our relationship. When I mentioned that the divorce proceedings were already well underway and that his adultery had been thoroughly documented, David's remaining composure finally cracked completely. He demanded to know how long I had been planning this outcome and whether I had ever intended to work on our marriage, or had simply been waiting for an opportunity to destroy him financially. The questions revealed his fundamental misunderstanding of both my character and his own responsibility for our situation. My response was measured and calm, explaining that his choices had created the circumstances we were now navigating, and that I had simply responded to those circumstances in a way that protected my interests. The betrayal had been his decision, the lies had been his choice, and the consequences were the natural result of actions he had taken without considering how they might affect me or our shared future. David's final words before walking away were about Vanessa and how this situation would affect her life and her business aspirations. The fact that his primary concern was for his mistress rather than for the marriage he had destroyed confirmed that I had been right to prioritize my own interests over any lingering hope for reconciliation. He had made his choice about who mattered to him, and now he was living with the results of that decision. Driving away from the closing, I felt a sense of completion that went beyond the financial benefits of the transaction. The house that had once represented my dreams of domestic happiness with David was now the foundation for a much more interesting future built on my own capabilities and judgment. The mortgage payments he had made during our separation had funded my transition to a new life, turning his betrayal into my opportunity. The next few weeks brought reports from Nicole about David and Vanessa's frantic search for housing and their increasingly strained relationship. The revelation about the mortgage arrangement had created a crisis of trust between them that mirrored what David and I had experienced, except that Vanessa's deception had been deliberate and calculated, rather than the result of assumptions and miscommunication. Vanessa's social media presence became increasingly erratic as their move approached. Her posts about embracing change and trusting the universe took on a desperate quality that suggested she was struggling to maintain her wellness brand persona while dealing with the practical realities of finding affordable housing. The spiritual teacher who had seemed so confident while living in my house was proving much less enlightened when faced with actual adversity. The business opportunities I had identified in Austin began materializing as word spread about my successful property development work in Denver. Former clients reached out about staging and renovation services, while real estate agents referred potential partners interested in investment opportunities. My reputation had apparently survived the scandal of my divorce and been enhanced by stories about my professional success in Colorado. James flew to Austin for a long weekend to tour potential properties and meet with local contractors and suppliers. His presence provided both professional support and personal validation of the partnership we had built. Seeing him interact with Austin's real estate community reinforced my confidence that our business model could be successfully replicated in the Texas market. The final irony came when David reached out through his attorney to inquire about potentially renting back the house from the new owners on a temporary basis. The desperation behind this request was apparent, but even more telling was his assumption that I might somehow facilitate such an arrangement. The man who had betrayed our marriage still expected me to solve his housing problem, revealing a level of entitlement that explained so much about how our relationship had deteriorated. My attorney's response was professionally neutral, but definitively negative. I had no relationship with the new owners beyond the sale transaction, and any rental arrangements would need to be negotiated directly between David and them. The suggestion that I might intercede on behalf of the man who had cheated on me with a woman who was now creating additional complications in his life was politely but firmly dismissed. 6 months after discovering David's affair in my own kitchen, I was standing in that same space for the final walkthrough, before turning over keys to the new owners. The rooms that had once echoed with Vanessa's yoga instructions and David's laughter now stood empty and ready for someone else's dreams. The violation I had felt seeing another woman's belongings in my home had been transformed into satisfaction at seeing their remnants packed away in cardboard boxes. The house itself looked tired and slightly damaged from the rapid transition between occupants. Vanessa's modifications had left marks on walls and floors that would require repair, while David's stress about the sale had apparently led to neglect of basic maintenance. The new owners were planning a complete renovation anyway, but the visible evidence of how carelessly David and Vanessa had treated my former home provided a fitting metaphor for how they approached relationships and responsibilities. Standing in the empty master bedroom where I had once imagined growing old with David, I felt grateful rather than nostalgic. The betrayal that had devastated me had ultimately freed me from a marriage that was limiting my potential and connected me to a partner who valued my contributions without needing to diminish me to feel important about himself. David's choice to replace me had given me the opportunity to replace him with something infinitely better. The keys I handed over to the new owners were more than just access to a house. They represented the final severing of my connection to a life that had been built on false assumptions and unequal partnerships. Walking away from that house for the last time, I carried with me the financial resources to build whatever future I could envision, and the hard-won wisdom to ensure that future would be based on mutual respect rather than romantic fantasy. The story that had begun with such pain and humiliation was ending with triumph that felt both deeply personal and professionally validating. David and Vanessa had taught me valuable lessons about trust and strategic thinking, lessons that would serve me well as I continued building a life based on partnerships that were legally documented and mutually beneficial. The woman who had been dismissed as the weaker choice had proven to be the stronger player in a game they hadn't even realized they were playing. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.